Hello, everyone. This is another edition of Local Arthur Series. I'm Ron Harris, the Adult Services Manager of TPL, and today I have James Matthew Byers, the Darque Bard. How's it going?
Hey, it's great. It's so wonderful to be here today.
All right, so you have the robe on. So tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit
Sure.
about the Darque Bard.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a publishing deal with an indie press called Stitch Small Publications in 2016, and they picked up Beowulf, and it was released early 2017. And as part of the way, as a storyteller and a poet, we kind of came up with the idea to create a brand to be more than just, a poet, to be the Darque Bard, so that when I go around and travel, I literally, wear this robe, which I can tell you is very hot in the summertime, but
Not a summertime robe. Yeah.
no, and I actually have some lighter weight ones coming in, but I also have a tiger costume that I wear the robe with because a character from my stories named Bengali, I dress up as him for small children. So it was just about kind of bringing the idea of the bard into the modern day setting so that people could kind of get that oral tradition of storytelling, and I wanted to look the part.
So that's actually a great segue to one of my questions. Bards are were known as oral storytellers. Specifically, they told these free verse poems, also known as epics. What drew you to this style of storytelling?
Well, way back when I very first started getting into poetry, I was 12, I was in the sixth grade, but I always loved fantasy fiction and I loved sci-fi, and mythology always intrigued me. I was a kid who, when we were in middle school and high school, was all about the epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, of course, Beowulf, Shakespeare. I always loved Dr. Seuss. And so I kind of created this notion when I was probably in my early teens. I wanted to be J.R.R. Tolkien meets Dr. Seuss. So
Mhm.
that kind of led me into the concept, I wanted to be known as the rhyming storyteller, and I choose rhyme because I use a specific meter, iambic tetrameter, because it's really fluid when you hear it read aloud. It really works well in the oral facet of storytelling.
That's that's great. I'm a Tolkien fan myself, so glad to know
Ah,
that we have similar interests. So let's talk about your involvement with the Tuscaloosa Illustrators and Writers Guild. How did you become involved with this group, and also talk a bit about the importance of organizations such as this one?
fantastic, absolutely. Well, through one of my friends, Carolyn Ezel, who's a very well-known writer around town, and her husband Jim, I was invited to come in. I, fell in love with the group. Patricia Corvell, that's there. So many other members. I, love the group, and I'm also in another group in Pell City, Alabama. It's called Writers Anonymous, and I really think writers groups are great because you find that support, you find your tribe, so to speak, and you
Mhm.
can be yourself. You can share your craft, but you can also hone your craft, and you can build off of one another, and you have support, because it's not an easy industry to break into. And even when you get published, I think when I was young, I had that misconception. Oh, if I sign a book publishing deal, I'm going to be rich. No, it doesn't work like that. But it's great to have the support. And I love Twig because I'm also an illustrator as well as an author. I did the cover for Beowulf, the interior illustrations, and I love that it supports both the artistic avenue of creativity and the writing avenue of creativity.
Yeah, that's great. And flipping through your book, I love the illustrations as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially with a I mean, of course there have been like live adaptations of Beowulf, but it's always cool to see like other people's imaginations and renderings of what these characters look like. Particularly like the Grendel illustration. I really like that. So
Sweet.
so you will be reading a sample of Beowulf, the Midgard Epic. Beowulf, as we know it, is an alliterative epic. This means, a string of words that start with the same letter. Your version is rhymed.
Yes.
Interesting choice. First, talk about what compelled you to revise this epic into a rhymed version, and also discuss the process that led
Ah,
to that.
yes, absolutely. Well, going back to Tolkien and the influence of his work, I knew what a great fan he was of Beowulf. That Beowulf was sort of what was a catalyst in propelling him to want to create, a British epic or story that was their own kind of mythology, whatnot. And I always wanted to be known as the rhyming storyteller. So kind of after a failed attempt with my own storyline, which later I know there are some questions coming up. I'm thinking that we could discuss some things that are really cool with my own universe. But I had multiple failed attempts at publication with rhyming epics that were my own. And I was like, I love Beowulf. And I thought to myself, wow, iambic tetrameter is such a great, fluid, poetic formula that if I could get this in that format and stay true to the actual translation, that maybe I would have a shot at, getting something out there. And also, I'm also a middle school teacher of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And at the time I was teaching 8th grade English at Moody Junior High School. And I tried to introduce Beowulf to them, and they're like, this is boring. I don't like it. Well, I thought, I'm going to experiment. So I would start researching in literally 2 years up to the point I got to where I actually started writing it. I had read 7 different translations, listened to audio formats of the Old English to kind of get the rhythm and how it went. So there was a lot of backpedaling to get to the forefront of the actual writing process with Beowulf. But then when I started writing it in rhyme and sharing it with the students, they loved it. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to have Beowulf that's accessible to younger audiences. And so that kind of concept of, I loved epics, I loved rhyming poetry, it's always been the way I write. And I thought if I could just push this into Beowulf and mash it up, and it worked. And 4 years later, I'm still blessed to be selling books, and I've spoken at universities and had multiple different venues where I've read from it. And I just also think it's important to keep the epics and the ancient oral stories in the present, because they get so phased out so readily with all the modern things we have with technology. With every other day there's a new movie, a new video game, so just partly just also was to keep the modern the modern idea fresh with the barding and the epic telling.
I think that's you raise a good point. This is an epic, and we don't want it to get lost with time. So since it exists in the public domain, then I feel like, yes, it should be remixed and revisited for modern audiences. So with that said, were you at all nervous about the public's reception of your revision?
Oh, hey, yes, absolutely. And in fact, I graduated with my master's from JSU in 2010, and one of my professors that I had in undergrad and grad, Dr. Joanne Gates, was one of my Beowulf professors. And when the book came out, she got a big venue for me at JSU, and she read it, and I was literally petrified, because this woman knows Beowulf better than anybody that I know, So, and she loved it, and I was like, wow, she had me come into her classroom and read to her students 2 days in a row. So in that aspect, I think I was more nervous about what Dr. Gates would think than what the rest of the world. I was ready for the world,
Right.
but my professor, who was a great mentor, I was really like, okay, I've got to make this work. I've got to make this work. So, but that was the only nerve part I think that I even had. Other than that, I was ready to throw Beowulf to everyone. I wanted to know Grendel and Grendel's mother, and just dive into it.
I think it works well. Like when Carol told me this is the project you would be reading from today, I was like, that's interesting. So I read it, and I was like, it flows well. It's yeah, it like you said, nothing is taken away from the original story. It flows really well. It's just a different way to tell the same story, and I found it to be very interesting. So with that said,
Awesome.
you will be reading a bit of this for us today.
Yes.
All right. I also have it here, Beowulf the Midgard Epic. All right. I will share the screen, and whenever you're ready, you can get started.
Absolutely. Chapter 11, Beowulf, the Midgard Epic. Out from the marsh and rotted logs, the misty hills and sinking bogs, arose the one god's hatred clothed, rose Grendel, bloodlust fully posed. In hopes to catch and clip and kill as many as would suit his thrill, in Heorot, that hall on high, delighted knowing men would die. He quickly moved to mid the plight of cloudy cover through the night, upon his swampy gloomy hold, to silence to the shining gold of Heorot, to make his call upon the men within the hall. So many times he'd been to slay, quite well he knew the well-worn way, but never once before nor after found within such planned disaster, waiting in the guarded post, a harsher greeting from his host. In joyless angst he came for more, as eagerly he sought the door, The way had those times before thus snapped it open to procure his heart's intent as angrily he crossed the threshold readily. With speed he strode across the ground, his snarling features tight and bound. His eyes bulged out a fearsome sight, embedded with an eerie light. He stopped, then seeing war men sleep, all nestled snugly in their keep. And in his heart fiendish delight set in, and he indulged the sight, intending to tear life and limb from those left unaware of him. By morning's light the demon's brain grew scorched with thoughts beyond the pain. His claws would reek, desiring food to fill his belly's lustful mood. But fate decided differently, and Grendel was not yet to see the present mold the die had cast, and thus this meal would be his last. The evil steps the being took were seen by human eyes that looked. Awaiting in that they saw to scope this creature's horrid claws. Then Grendel lashed his claws to snatch the nearest yet he could catch, and tore the flesh from off his bone. His body sliced by razors shone. Within the dimness as the teeth the creature bore without relief, then drank the blood from in the veins, and ate till nothing yet remained, till death found teeth bound in a rut, as jaws closed up and snapped life shut. Then reckless he let greed endure, and moved to make his mark secure, by feasting on another man. But this was not to be the plan, for who he bade his gut enjoy was not akin to sleep's employ. This Beowulf in wakeful stance became the monster's circumstance, who found himself indeed the one within the grip and out of fun. His claws pushed back behind and caught in Beowulf's imprisoned taut, and mighty hold who leaned upon the arm of Grendel, pressing bone. That evil minion, criminal, knew all at once his plate was full, for not a place on earth remained such hands as these to bring such pain. His head grew full with fearful fright, but nothing there amid the tight and painful clench his tendons, nor his claws nor self could dare endure to wrestle free from in the clasp, placed under by this human's grasp. Emancipation from the clutch of Beowulf engorged in such a manner as he only thought, his marshes freedom all he sought, to bear away and run and hide, his quest in Heorot denied, for never had this finest hall held such a man within its walls. But Beowulf remembered well his final boast, his wordy sell, and stood upright to halt the fiend from fleeing, kept him quarantined within his grip till Grendel's claws began to crunch and snap in awe of heavy wonder in those hands, which closer forced the beast to stand and bend unto the hero's might. The wicked beast attempted flight without the wish for human skin, just freedom he desired then. His talons crushed, his movement stalled. That fateful trip within those walls became a scourge of misery to Grendel as he could not flee. The creaking roof began to sway as Heorot boomed underway, and every Dane within it shook in horror as the battle took a dip, a turn down every aisle. Their sensing none could reconcile. Livid, crazed, and rather nimble, Heorot's walls barked and trembled, wonderfully designed to stand against the forces yet at hand. It shaped and fastened iron walls inside and out, in beauty's call, continued to hold firmly still. Its benches toppled, then they fell. Upon the floor each golden board, beneath the fury frenzied horde of Beowulf and Grendel's fight, those architects had crafted might within the walls of Heorot to hold any battle brought by armies seeking to corrupt its beauty. Only flames abrupt, induction to its wooden base, would evermore move it from place. The rising noise brought sudden change, and roused the Danes within it strange, and feral howl a creating new, a fitful terror from its brew. Their beds as streams ripped out again, of God's vile enemy who sang, somewhere in darkness cries of pain, and knowledge born of dire defeat, the moans no longer made retreat. From Grendel's throat, hell's hostage bound, amid the arms of him now found to be the strongest man on earth, this one held Grendel by his girth. That powerful and mighty lord, in everything he could afford, gave all he had to slay the beast, until its life was force released. aware of something of this brand, would only curse all of Daneland. Then Beowulf's crew cut the thread of sleep and rouse from out their beds, their ancient blades held high and stout, determined to help their prince out. Bravado ranged within each man, but none could levy out his plan. Though they could slash at Grendel's side, could plunge each blade and swing out wide, the path within him was denied, no matter how each soldier tried. The keenest steel could not begin to barely even scratch the skin of Grendel, for though sin's deception, he bewitched all mankind's weapons, spells that dulled the sharpest blade, and still his time would soon be made complete. His days on earth drew nigh, full knowing soon he was to die. Embarking on one last advent to hell below without consent, or penance to the waiting jaws of much, much worse than Grendel's claws. Now revelation settled in, this one who once afflicted men, was trouble brought his feud with God. His strength that once had been his rod broke free of him and evanesced. His claws no longer he possessed, bound fast by Higelac's delight, who tore with unbound might. The demon's hatred rose there shone, but now his strength had all but gone. He writhed in horrifying pain as bleeding sinews, bursting veins in places deep within his shoulder, snapped and toppled like a boulder, falling from a crevice high, as muscle split and ripped awry. From bone until at last it broke, for Beowulf the battle spoke in unheard words of victory, though Grendel managed yet to free. But wounded in such manner fled, and to his marsh consumed with dread, and knew his days were all gone by, aware once there he'd fall and die. And after futile bloody sport, the Danes exhaled in this report, in laughter full of mirth and glee, the Geat from across the sea, brash-winded, strong, and brave beyond all men had managed to abscond the wickedness, the foulest rot, and purged the dens of Heorot. Quite thrilled with all his long night's duty, there within the great hall's beauty, Beowulf had served his boast. He's promised to the Danish coast. The Geat's prince had stilled the beast who haunted once the great hall's feast, had ended grief and sorrow's pang brought on the Danes by Grendel's fangs. Now Hrothgar's suffering would end, as though this triumph joy would win, and not a single Dane refused to doubt the victory, amused, and staring up below the roof where hung their only needed proof. The devil's claw his shoulder and his arm at Beowulf's command.
Thank you. That reading was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if someone's interested in picking up a copy of this, where can they get it from?
You can get it at Amazon.com. It's in some bookstores like Barnes and Nobles and Books of Men. And if they don't have it in stock, they will order it for you. It can come in. It's in brick and mortar. It's on Amazon, online, and online at all retail bookstores, and I believe Target as well. So just search for James Matthew Byers, Beowulf, the Midgard Epic. And if you're wondering why there's like a little tag, the Midgard Epic, when I was in college, I did this research paper to try to connect the ancient poem, The Wanderer, to Beowulf, that the Wanderer was actually Wiglaf, who stayed by his side fighting the dragon.
Oh.
That was him lamenting the loss of his great thane. And so what I did is, in both undergrad and grad, I built on this thesis, and when I wrote the rhyming version, there's an epilogue, and it's the Wanderer, and it follows the same rhythmic pattern as Beowulf. So I kind of put it together, so you have Beowulf, the Midgard Epic, so it's kind of contains two ancient poems put together as one unit.
That's great. So if you are wanting to pick up Beowulf, the Midgard Epic, is available online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. So you previously mentioned your own universe. So what's next for the Darque Bard? Are you currently working on anything?
Absolutely. In fact, with the same publishing house, Stitch Smile Publications, I'm in the final processes of going through with my editor, and my own original epic poem, it's called Valkyria, should be available probably in at least maybe 3 to 5 months. It's in the final stages of preparation now, and I got to do the cover art for it as well. And it's set in my own world. It's the place I created. It's called Mytholonia. So it's a story about a dwarf who's she's a female half-breed. She's a dwarf and an orc mixed together, and it's her struggles and her overcoming all the things she has to go through to get to the point where she feels like she can be herself. So it's really a story of overcoming adversity and a triumph, and it's different than most fantasy tropes, and it's not the way the story started when I was 15. I'm 45 now, so I've had these characters for 30 years. And so after playing around with everything, it's kind of fun to get to go back. And that finally, thanks to Beowulf, it was it gave me the door opening to get my own stuff out. So now I can start kind of presenting my own world and my own characters and introduce them to people. So I'm really excited that with Stitch My Publications, I'll have Valkyria, my own original epic, coming out. And again, wanting to be the rhyming storyteller, I couldn't write it in prose. It had to come out in rhyme.
Of course, of course. But that's actually a great segue to my next question. This is a question I ask all Twig members. Let's say someone is watching this at home. They're a prospective writer, but they're holding on to their work. They're afraid to release it to the world. What advice would you give that person?
Release it. Look, I'm going to tell you, for all of you aspiring authors out there, don't be scared. I had 247 rejections before Beowulf was published, and perseverance, believing in yourself, believing in your craft. If you have a story to tell, let it be read. There's a reason I believe that people are filled with these ideas and these thoughts that we want to bring out to humanity, and we want to share with our neighbors and our friends and our families. And depending on how far you want that to go, I really would tell any aspiring author, don't hold back. But I would also advise you to make sure that you check guidelines. Like when I was naive and young in the publishing field back in 1996 was the first time I ever submitted anything for publication. Back then we didn't have the internet like we do now. And, you had to go to a bookstore and flip through books. I always tell people, make sure you read the guidelines, because you want to format correctly. You want to be able to query correctly. So take those steps and go for it. Don't let your work sit on your file on a computer somewhere just collecting space.
That's great advice. Yeah, like I said, this is really interesting. So I really hope everyone checks it out. Like I said, I love Beowulf myself. I guess I'll tell a funny story. I once had a teacher, and he introduced the class to classics and epics by doing something called bad adaptations. So he showed us the movie. He showed us the movie 13th Warrior, and then he was like, "Okay, you want to see the good version of this?" And he let us read Beowulf. So that was my introduction to Beowulf, and I've loved it ever since. So,
awesome.
Like I said, this is awesome. Have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to say thank you so much for having me today, and I've really enjoyed conversing with you, and I'm always excited to meet a fellow person who loves Beowulf, because those are far and few between. But hopefully my version is accessible. That's the whole point, and I really had a great time chatting with you today. This was awesome.
I enjoyed it as well. Until next time, we'll see you later.